what's up you guys? It's Simon. Welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I am essentially going to be teaching you guys how to cheat at art. It's not technically cheating, but it feels like it at first. So basically what I'm intending to do with this video is kind of try to teach you guys how I use like basic shapes as a way to help me understand like form, I guess, if that makes sense. And also kind of technically using tracing, but not quite. It'll make sense here in a little bit. But the first thing that I wanted to start off with kind of trying to use this technique for was hands, because I get a ton of questions about how I draw hands. And the answer is a lot of practice, usually a lot of references, and also this shape technique. So basically the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select from one of these, and I think I want to go with this hand right here because it has a lot of not like a lot of foreshortening, but it does have a little bit of that, and that can be really difficult when just looking at it as a reference point alone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all of these other hands for now because they are big distraction, and we just want to focus on our one hand that we have here. So I'm going to make this this image way bigger. I'm gonna get rid of that circle that I made, and then I'm going to start breaking this down. So what I usually do is I put a layer above it, and I might lower the opacity on this layer if I notice that there's like a lot of, you know, colors and lighting that's just kind of confusing. I might lower it, but sometimes I leave it fully opaque, but I'm going to lower it for this specific hand. And then I take a really bright saturated color, usually like a lime green or a cyan or a yellow or like a hot pink, something like that, just a very vibrant color, and I start kind of trying to break the hand down into shapes. So right here I can see that this is kind of like a rectangle. So I trace the X, actually a little bit closer to a trapezoid, but I basically am just starting to mark off the big shapes that I see. I am going to switch colors every once in a while, so that we can kind of tell the difference between certain parts. But for the main like sort of big sections, I'll start off with one color. So there's another trapezoid there, and then if I wanted to move on to the fingers, I would take another color. So I'm gonna go with this blue, and I would block off yet another trapezoid, another one here, and just start kind of really breaking it down into its most basic freaking shapes. So this would be like kind of, I don't know what you would consider that to be, kind of like an oval, but like if it had like a chop at the end of one of the corners, or not corners because it's round, but you know what I mean, one of the edges just chopped right off. This I would say would be a triangle, but because it's so close to all of these other ones, I would take again another color. Bright purple works fine, and I would mark this off as kind of a triangle here, and then I would yet again do another oval, switch that color so that it stands out against that, and a little tiny triangle here. So you can see, you know, everything's starting to come into its own little shape. I might break the fingers up like this, just put some lines through there. And then, yeah, everything's broken down into its like most basic freaking form. I'm not worried about any of these like wrinkles or lines in the hand or anything like that. None of the fine curves. I'm just worried about these basic shapes right here. I will say, like, when it comes to foreshortening, you might want to define like areas right here where you notice like the fingers coming apart, but like if it was like just any other sort of shape, like one of the more simple ones, for example, I deleted it, but I can insert one right here. If it was this one, for example, you wouldn't worry about all of these little lines in between these knuckles. You're just worried about the solid, like, bigger shapes. So the next thing that I do once I have all of these broken down is I will hide my original layer, and I'll bring this over to the side, and then I will try to copy these shapes. So I'm not tracing directly over top of them. I'm just observing what I you know, created what I traced over the original image, and then trying to interpret those shapes on their own without tracing. So I'm going to do that probably sped up to make things a little easier.
1, 2, 3, funky. My darling, I love you, 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 I love you.
Okay, so here we can see how everything is broken down, and now that we've got like sort of these initial shapes, this is when we're going to go back to our reference photo and start adding in all of those fine lines, all of those creases that make the hand more recognizable as an actual hand. So I'm going to go over in this bright pink so that you guys can see, you know, how it shifts, how it changes. So you can see that there's these basic shapes here. You don't really see like these creases, not creases, indentations. So we're going to enhance that in the actual, you know, sketch and things like that. We're going to, you know, go over and add all of those fine little details that make it more understandable rather than just like all of these shapes kind of muddled and pushed together. All the subtle like creases and things like that that make a hand a hand. So we're just going to add those in, and I'm not going to get too detailed with this, of course, because this is just a video. I'm not trying to, you know, make a whole illustration here. I'm just trying to explain what it is exactly that I do. But yeah, I just start adding in all of those details that make it a little bit more noticeable. So hopefully that makes sense and you guys understand, you know, how I've broken that down. And the reason that I do this is because there are some things that are just hard to understand when looking at them directly. So for example, I'm going to not do that. I'm going to insert another one of these hand illustrations, and I will go with something like this that again has a little bit of foreshortening, has a little bit of an angle to it. I'm going to erase away these. Oh. Erase them a little better so I'm not erasing part of the actual reference that we're using. And then I'm also going to hide all of these other layers that we did previously. Hello. And I'm going to show you guys like basically how I would normally draw this if I'm just trying to follow a reference. So when I'm not breaking things down into shapes, and you can kind of see where even with a ton of practice, shapes like this are just hard to convey, especially when it comes to foreshortening and angles and stuff like that can just make a hand look really weird and hard to understand. And you can see how wonky this is. Obviously I'm going fast, so if I were to slow it down and go a little bit you know, slower, it would be a little bit neater, a little bit nicer. But regardless, I would still have mistakes here when it comes to the foreshortening and the angle of this hand, as well as here, and how, you know, these fingers look when they're basically pointed straight at you. Those are something that I really struggle with, and I often end up looking how it does here, where it's like they're pointed straight down, like somebody's giving a peace sign, rather than stretching their hand out like this. So what I would do is that breaking down shape method. I think that this is better for things like this when it comes to like foreshortening or dynamic poses that you don't really understand or know how to use, or again, things like just hands in general, because those can be really hard to understand at first. So if you ever find anything, whether it's like the human body or a piece of machinery or something like that, anything that you don't know how to illustrate at first, I would recommend using this method where you go over top of something and try to break it down into these most geometric of shapes. Something I would not recommend also, you want to make sure you're literally using your basic shapes. So like rectangle, that is not a trapezoid, triangle, circle, things like that. What you do not want to do is go over this area, for example, and say, oh, well, this is a shape. Because yes, that technically is a shape, but that's not going to help you when you're breaking things down. You're not going to be able to understand that as much as you would be able to understand like, oh, this is a triangle, this is a trapezoid, this is a rectangle or a pentagon or something like that, you know, this is going to be a lot easier to understand than saying, for example, that this is a shape or that these are a shape, you know. Try and keep it as basic as possible. Or like even this is a shape. Like, yes, that's a shape, but it also is not going to help you. So try and break things down as simply as you possibly can. And again, when you are doing this sort of like trace over method, never just trace these geometric shapes and then neaten it up or like stylize them and use that direct bit that you traced, because in the end, you're not going to learn from that. The whole point is that you trace over it, you break it down into those shapes, and then you try to recreate those shapes so that when you try to make something, whether it's like in that angle or like just that general body part, again, you kind of understand what shapes that body part is made of, so you're able to eventually create it in the future without using reference or without using this particular method. So again, never use the actual part you traced, recreate that traced bit that you did. So next I wanted to kind of go over things with like a more dynamic like pose like this. Again, just like we talked about with that foreshortening in the hand, there are going to be some reference photos or some dynamic poses that you really, really, really want to recreate that it's just hard to understand from looking at first glance. So we're going to use that same trace over method for the whole human body. So first thing that I'm going to do is try and break down this head so I can see she's got obviously like kind of spear here. And I'm also going to leave this at full opacity because the background is very light versus the other one where the background was super dark. If we lighten the opacity on this, we can lose some of that shapes because this is of course a girl with light skin. The background is light. When you lower the opacity, it's gonna disappear a little bit. So if you have something that has a really light background and a subject that also is really light, you might want to keep it at full opacity. But if you have like a light subject matter or a dark subject matter with a contrasting background, then I would lower the opacity. But for something like this, I'm going to keep it completely solid. But I am still doing that method where I'm going over top on a separate layer, and I bumped you guys, very sorry. So yeah, I'm going to break down the head. We've got a sphere here, maybe even, why was that so thick? Part of a rectangle here and a triangle as well. And then I'm going to move over to a different color for the neck so we can kind of separate the two. I'm going to take this blue and I'm going to see that the neck is a little bit of a, I would call that maybe a rectangle, maybe a little bit trapezoidal, but you know, it's still that basic solid shape. That line goes down into a triangle here. This is just so you can help separate the neck from the chest. Next thing I would say is maybe go this pink color, another trapezoid here, another rectangle here, and then her shoulder would be kind of like a spear, kind of an oval, going down into like kind of a cylinder shape, and then a circle, another cylinder, and circle, or even a pentagram right here. You know, just kind of try and break it down into as easy of a shape as you can possibly get. So that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to come back to you guys when it's all finished. Okay, so we can see everything's kind of broken down into its own individual shape, and it's a lot easier to understand than just looking at the image itself. So this might look frightening, but when you recreate it, it will look a lot closer to the reference image than if I were to just, again, similarly with the hand previously, just go over and try to, and let me turn off my little referencey layer. If I were to just try and follow the shapes from my initial perspective, you can already see that things are getting a little wonky perspective wise. It's just difficult to kind of understand. And again, this would still hold true for me personally, even if I were to sit down and take some time to try and draw this illustration. I know this is a pose that I would start to try and draw and then get really frustrated with and give up on because I'm not using that sort of like shape breaking down method, just trying to analyze it initially. I would get really frustrated and give up because things would look super, super weird, and I wouldn't bother trying trying to fix it because I'd be like, nope, I cannot draw this. You can see like with the arm in particular how it's not quite the same angle as the leg and things like that. So looking at it like this, it's not too far off, but it is something that is not correct, and also something that I would just really struggle with when it came to like finalizing the piece and things like that. So again, I'm gonna open this little layer up, I'm going to turn off the original reference, and then I'm going to recreate those shapes. Okay, so clearly you guys can see this is how the end result turned out, and I did accidentally delete the initial example that I had for you guys of just me trying to draw it from reference rather than using this method. So if you need to see how it kind of differs and how the anatomy is a little bit wonkier in the original, you can backtrack a little bit, but I can tell you that for certain this is a lot more correct anatomy wise than if I were to just initially draw it from again, my initial view, initial understanding of that pose. And this has really helped me for like a ton of things, like that image that I was talking about earlier, like a lot of the hands that I draw, like a lot of objects even. For example, if I'm having trouble drawing like a certain prop that might be within an illustration, I use this method as well, or animals, because I am so very bad at drawing animals. In fact, if you guys remember my tracing video, this is very similar to the method of that crab, but rather than taking all of those initial steps, I'm just doing that initial trace over and then trying to use that trace over that I did as a reference rather than like trying to draw it on and off like crazy. But yeah, I hope that this method was helpful to you guys and that you enjoyed this video. This was intended to be a bonus video, but if this goes up as a regular Saturday upload, I hope that it was entertaining nonetheless. Of course, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I also, as always, want to give a big shout out to my patrons Elise Thompson, Duran, Mandy, Sleeps, Created by Twins, and Kruhi. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for continuing to support me every single month. If you guys are interested in checking out some of the Patreon rewards for April, this month's theme I think is really cute. I'm really working real hard on a lot of the illustrations for Patreon this month, as I do every month, but since April is my birthday month, I've been going a little extra hardcore. I've also been experimenting with kind of a new sort of painting style, so yeah, these month's rewards are definitely very special, and I would highly recommend checking them out. If you guys are also interested in March's rewards, they will be up at the end of this month as per usual. You guys are going to see them some more in the studio vlog like I did last month. But yeah, if you guys are interested, the Patreon will be linked down in the description alongside all my all my other social media. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I love y'all, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.